Hello to everyone on the On That Point podcast. It's been a while. It's been a long time coming, and of course, I'm not talking about John Cena's heel turn, but I am talking about the four of us, the old guard, the old crew, finally getting together and deciding to have a chat about debate stuff again, which is, I'm sure, going to be very exciting for all of us. It was about, not too far removed from our first episode. I think the anniversary of our first episode. I think it's still a few months until then. But it's probably auspicious for us to have, first of all, in alphabetical order, I suppose, Ali Nawaz, Ashar Imran, myself, and Taha Masood joining us again to talk about, as we said, debate stuff. And I think the first way to probably start talking about debate is to talk about the biggest tournament of the year so far, or at least perhaps one of the more enjoyable ones, Shahjiwana this year. And we have none other than the winners of Shahjiwana this year, joining the exclusive, and with one of its members joining a very exclusive club of people who've won it twice, Taha Masood and Ali Nawaz. So I think it's best to probably ask them about their experience first. What did they like? How did they do well? How did they end up doing so well? And what was the whole tournament like? Taha and Ali.
Well, Ahmad, I'll take lead on this one. I think first I do want to note that we have Shahjiwana winners and Shahjiwana best speaker inside this meeting right now, Ashar Imran over
Yes.
here. We'll talk a little bit about the best speaker in a moment as well because it's monumental in a couple of ways. But in terms of the experience Nawaz and I have had, I think this was actually a very special tournament for me. Because, I didn't win with Usher last year, and actually I had my historic lowest performance ever. So winning it the year right after that is very nice. But also, Nawaz is, I think, my oldest teammate at this point in terms of people I've spoken with, because I've actually been speaking with him since my A levels. So winning the biggest tournament of the year with my school teammate felt very, homecoming full circle. You could make accusations and say it took me 11 years to win it, but, that wouldn't be very fair because I've won it once before as well. I think it was a great experience. We had a bunch of fun rounds with a whole bunch of old returning speakers again, like Bhakti is there again from last year. Fatin and Samir are speaking, whole bunch of just old people from around the era I used to debate before. Very pleasant, felt like a very, very competitive Shahjiwana in 100 different ways. I actually want to see if anybody else wants to talk to the competitive level of this, because I think this was probably the most competitive Shahjiwana I've seen to date.
Yeah, I want to stress that like Shahjeevna pehle I think used to be kya pehle do teen rounds tak you just went into a room of randos, like not really expecting too much competition. I think Shahjeevna this year, from straight up round one, you are in rooms where a first is not like an entitled granted thing you will get. More importantly, I also think like even the average of the circuit just keeps on getting better and better, because even after, like, let's say a bad round, you don't necessarily end up in like those easier rounds where all of the other teams will just get the motions wrong. For example, like now, even in a straight seconds, yeah, straight thirds room, like everyone will sort of get the motion right, debate the obvious things, punish you if you don't make your arguments right. So it's like it's I think it's become much more consistent, perhaps more so than just even better.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it's the competitiveness of the tournament really lends to the stuff that we're going to talk about today in general. But yeah, Nawaz, what was it like carrying Taha to yet another tournament victory?
I mean, it does feel nice winning both the biggest university competitions uh, with the, especially after our lack of success during schools, felt kind of vindicating. I've also not tried Shajivna or Lamsavi that often. Like that Lamsavi was my second Lamsavi. The Shajivna was also my second Shajivna. So second time's the charm, I guess. Always, at least in my case. But yeah, I do agree. Like the level and the average of everybody in the circuit has definitely improved. But I guess like something to point out, it's not just amongst the top speakers that you typically would expect. It's not just like Bhakti or us people giving better than average speeches or getting high averages. I think it's also amongst people who are still entering university, still in the university circuit, or still in the school circuit as well. So if we go to this Shajiv now, I guess the team that gave Ta and me the biggest competition, in my opinion, apart from I would say Bhakti and Daniel Hassan, would probably be Sana and Yasser. and they're not in university yet, and that's kind of insane. So, and they were scoring 83s and 84s as well. So that just speaks to like how high the ceiling has gotten for everybody within the circuit still. And at least in the top rooms, I would say that judging is also very high quality. I know Shahjiwana has its inefficiencies, which, to say the least, it was still plagued with this year. But I mean, we had our role shifted last minute. Anfield was very busy and had a delay in the start of the round. But I think that's a part of the charm of the
Yeah, that's
event.
some classic Shahjiwana color.
Yeah, I want to stop on the like ये last minute motion change because like I have an incredible moment from this year Shajivna. क्योंकि somewhere round 3-ish, round 4-ish, I am in the washroom of Shajivna during prep time, getting ready to exit the washroom when none other than a very happy Taha Masood walks into the washroom. And I look at Taha and I say, Yaar, Taha, you saw my text message, right? You saw I message you that the sides changed and like we're all like prepping the right side. Taha looks at me. Taha pauses. Taha looks at me again. Taha runs away back to Nawaz, after which God knows what happened in that round. But yes, another Masood and Nawaz got their Shajivna experience this time around.
Yeah, we sadly learned that we were not in fact opening opposition and were in fact opening government 2 minutes before prep time elapsed, which is why I decided that going to the bathroom could come later because there were more pressing concerns to be had, and we ended up taking the second in that room anyway. Which is actually, on that note of competition, I just wanted to note, I think a significant part of the average competition, average quality increase is like we have a LUMS bulge against this year. I think there's something like 6 or 7, I don't know, it could be anywhere between 6 to 8 teams brought from Lums to Shajivna, and a lot of them were competitive. I ran into a handful of them over the course of the tournament, and they were all like, wow. So I genuinely think just the addition of what looks like 10 to 12 regular Lums speakers, again, has been a big deal for average university debating competition.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And like I was at the LUMS trials recently also, as was Imad. And honestly, like the big inflow of something like I think even more than 10 to 12, I think something like 16 to 18 speakers who will at minimum give an above average BP speech just consistently in the circuit is crazy. And I think speaks to the increasing improving health of like the circuit because it's not just slums because like I think I've seen a couple of universities here and there sort of like now having consistent teams that that during COVID and right after COVID sort of vanished. We also have had a lot more I think uni tournaments leading up like in the season that's just gone by, which I think is just also just proof that the circuit is getting healthier, bigger, all of those things once again.
Yeah, I mean, Ramzan is sort of a break, but we're probably going to have quite a few university tournaments. The university season is likely to continue after Eid as well. But Masood, you had raised a interesting point, and Nawaz has only been to Shajivna, as he said, twice. The rest of us who've more in the ballpark area of 6 times, 7 times. But finally, we do have, I think, a best speaker whose average we believe has, I believe it was Masood who mentioned, has crossed the usual average at Shajiv now, the usual average in the
Yes,
circuit. So
as the longest standing member of the community, let me just establish what has happened, and then we can have Ashif come and tell you what this means. Now, obviously, we don't have perfect data. We don't have ancient tabs anymore. We have a little bit of word of mouth, and we have some trends, and all of these seem to indicate one thing, which is that probably the highest best speaker in Shajivna and generally in circuit history locally was something like an 81, maybe 81 point something. Obviously, we're excluding from this tally silly tournaments which do things like add reply scores into main scores because those are non-serious. And we are also excluding from this tally a tournament where somebody has handed out a 90 something and just messed up the tab. In terms of reasonable tournament history, I think we can clearly say 81-ish something is the highest, and that's probably on the upper end because until a few years ago, scores used to average around 78-ish for a best speaker. Now, with all this in mind, Usher, when you won best speaker at Shajivna this year, what was your average?
82.
And I think that is probably the first time that that's been cracked at a serious tournament inside Pakistan. So I think we have currently the crowned champion of best speaker score ever. So Usher, would you like to talk a little bit about this experience and your tournament?
Yeah, my initial response is, oh, shucks. But like, my second response is, yeah, this was a wonderful Shajivna. Very honestly speaking, I was working very hard for this one. Like no jokes, this was not a, like, I went in and I was just goated with the sauce kind of situation. going into Shahjiwana, like I'd been speaking, I think I think I spoke 1 or 2 tournaments, like the month before Shahjiwana. I was generally like, I've been on like this improvement plan. I've been trying to get better and better. I've been watching lectures. I've been watching a lot of videos. I've sort of like been trying to identify what are things I consistently get wrong. Funnily enough, my knockout from Shahjiwana also happens on something I consistently get wrong, which is like running back cases every now and then. But this was I walked into Shahjiwana thus with like actually 3 and 4 like points that I was consciously thinking I'm going to like make sure I don't mess these up this time around. And yeah, like surprisingly, I never thought that like working hard helps, but it does. So but apart from that, like I think another thing that happens, and I take no credit away from myself. Obviously I was phenomenal, but I think judges have become slightly braver, like in the sense that people are now willing to give out slightly bigger numbers than they were, I would say, 3-4 years ago, especially. And this is also, I think, an international exposure thing. You've sort of seen कि यार अच्छी speeches क्या होती हैं, what does an 84 look like, okay, it's not like out of the realm of impossibilities, and sort of like those numbers have started coming in. But yeah, it's good to do well. And I do want to say, like, I remember when it was announced, like I remember a lot of like friends idhar udhar se just like rooting, and I think moments like these is like why it pays off to like do well. I think you sort of see everyone be happy with you for you, and I think yeah, excellent time to be Asher Imran this season.
And while you're talking about that, Asher, I think you can also use this opportunity to right a wrong on the top of the Shahjiwana speaker tab, where one very important person is missing.
Absolutely. So I would like to give out a big, big, big shout out to my partner Muhammad Ali PU Wale, as most of the circuit knows him, who the circuit will never remember probably because there is no state data on this, but the streets will never forget. Is the probably the best scored second best speaker of all time with an average of something along the lines of an 81.6,
Yeah.
81.8-ish situation. Muhammad Ali was not in the tab only because he thought that, because like the iron person policy allows us to iron person once, he thought it wouldn't affect his speaker score ranking situation if he misspoke 1 round. And to his credit, Bichara even took permission from the cab, but like the situation was a misunderstanding, and later everyone's still like chill and happy about it. But big shout out to Muhammad Ali PU Wale
Yeah.
for an incredible performance, like
The
81 points.
rightful number 2 on the tab, but that slot has been taken by Big Taha Masood and his department of cronies who've made sure he can't drop too far from the top.
The establishment keeps winning.
The establishment keeps winning, the authority, the corporation,
पिंडी से
whatever you
आया है
like
ना
to call
मसूद,
them.
असल में पिंडी के बहुत पास पास है, like we know where the power lies in this country.
Yeah, and I mean, another member of the corporation and the authority and the establishment, once he found out that the allocations for, I believe it was round two, the one that you were talking about, Asher. The allocations for round two, only when I found out that they had changed, I realized, while it clearly appears as if, the city needs me, so to speak. But, seeing was also a very enjoyable experience. It was my first time seeing Shahjiwana. Sunset Cafe, I finally, after all these years of having to pay for Sunset Cafe, I was finally very happy to not have to pay for it. So, shout out to Shahjiwana for keeping me well fed.
Have
But
you
yeah,
ever
that
in your
also,
life experienced greater luxury than that?
I have not. Although, unfortunately, and I mean, to some extent, this is my own fault as well. I had misplaced my sunglasses on Shahjiwana on the last day. So now I'm calculating whether or not the food I ate from Sunset Cafe was greater, equivalent, or less than an amount to the sunglasses. But when it comes to being capped, one thing I enjoyed was coming up with the motions for Shahjiwana. And, all of the cap, Ruth, Shakar, Ali Anfia, all of us sort of got together and tried to think about what the best motions would be. And I would like to say that, these were definitely a strong set. So, maybe you guys can talk about what motion you guys enjoyed the most. Maybe the spiritual leader motion in the semifinal. In the pre-semi, we gave a motion about Donald Trump being assassinated, which is a personal favorite of mine.
This is, I think, the first time I regretted not breaking into a pre-semi, because when I saw that the motion was about whether or not the world would be better with Trump assassinated, I thought, wow, that would have been an incredibly fun debate. And I think the out rounds were just straight bangers, like all of them. Like the semifinal is the first time I've gotten to debate from the perspective of a spiritual leader, jahan pe literally like earth-shattering powers are on the table, and then at the final you just get to have a big discussion on free will again. And for the first time in a very long time, I survived Bhakti running an agency argument. So the motion set phenomenal, very fun diversity of just arguments you don't get to hear in other motions.
All right, yeah. So I think
More
then
than like
then
that, I think the motions, like they were fun, of course, but they're so much better now. Like also, there's another aspect of like motions that's not being one-sided. In terms of you were asking my favorite motions, I was just running through the Shahjivna tab, and I think it has to be like either the semi ones, yeah, like my forever love of sports motions. Means that this house supports the prominence of sports diplomacy is like one I really, really love. That is also the one where Hantia Bhai gives me like my crazy 84. So like I have reasons to love it.
Imad,
But
given sorry, Ashley, you saying something?
no, that's it. That's it.
Mhm. Imad, given how good what motions were, did you feel there was something different in being cap here than in cap at other tournaments you've been in where motions are not as pristine?
I mean, the primary difference there is whenever I'm cap and whenever I'm interested in setting motions up or helping the team set up motions, then the motions are usually pristine. If I'm not involved, then they're kind of up to the whims of whoever's around. So, but yeah, I mean, capping at Shahjeevna generally was obviously very different. I think the OC was very experienced, and of course they had Ruth there as a foreign cap who was shout out to Ruth, a very fun person who came by for the second year. I mean, she joined us last year as well. So I didn't, but as a speaker, you don't get to know her as much. But as cap, I definitely did. So that was very enjoyable. And I mean, it's Shahjeevna, so there's a lot of there are lots of fires you have to put out periodically, and lots of sometimes you have to, like most of my capping, you have to carry a bit of a stick around, make sure that people are, when they're in the hall, they're listening to you once you start speaking and making announcements. But yeah, I mean, I think being cap for Shajivna was very fun, and I felt like at this point, after having spoken it 6 times, the seventh time should probably be one where I lend my services instead of taking advantage of someone else. So
Bit of a
yeah,
full circle moment for you.
bit of a full circle moment as well, I suppose.
Do you think
Yes.
do you think you have something on like Ruth's perspective on Pakistani circuit? Like is the outsider's perspective on the Pakistani circuit fascinating? Is it's the same as every other circuit? Anything you got on that front?
I don't think we got a chance to discuss, the Pakistani circuit in particular. I do know, okay, Ruth does obviously have the impression that it is a strong circuit, or the very least that it's a developing circuit that's becoming stronger. And we did talk a little bit about circuits in the third world, especially with the whole Panama WUDC controversy, where lots of countries from the third world were struggling to sort of reach. So we did talk about how Pakistan is probably like a good player, within third world circuits as a whole. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of, that was Shajivna, and that was our experience in person. But we've been doing, some of us more than others have been doing quite a bit of online debating over the last several months as well. I mean, that was also a main topic in some of our earlier episodes. So, I mean, TNT has been, I've heard, has been hitting off. I've heard that, Usher's been doing pretty well. Ali Nawaz, unfortunately, he was saddled with me for one online tournament. So, we didn't do as well as we should have. But yeah, I mean, who wants to talk about um, why debating is fun again? Not again, but why debating is still fun online.
Nawaz, why don't you like take the head on this one?
I mean, I'm really not the best person for it because I've done not too much of it, but I'll tell you what I miss, okay? And this is probably partially maybe impacted our performance at Fast as well. Online debating is very fun as long as you have like the people that you're debating with around you.
Yeah.
Or it's really fun if there's a vast community that you're familiar with attending the same event or events around that same time, right? Without that infrastructure, it's kind of hard to get into it. So, like right now, I know me and Usher might be speaking in an online tournament at some point. I know I'll probably hit Saram up and look into an online tournament, although he'll be in a distant. Dog can come in Islamabad at some point, but like in that type of a lens, online debating will always be more fun, and it's something different because I do think that there's a value to online debating that you always get, which is not just the convenience. It's that fundamentally there are some niche differences within every single circuit, and it allows you to engage with it. So I think if you like go to an online tournament, if it's an MMA based tournament, or if you go to an Asian or Filipino based tournament versus a European based one, it's going to give you different experiences, and it's also going to give you perhaps a higher level of competition on a much more consistent basis, and most importantly, education as well, which is always more exciting. So those elements are always going to exist. That's my take. I think after that, actually, you're probably the best person to bring in on it because you've probably done the most out of all of us, at least recently.
Actually, surprisingly, not even close because Taha Masood has been hitting off every now and then, sometimes with Sarim, sometimes with myself, sometimes with Iqbal. I'll shed like some light on it, then I'll pass it on to Taha, who I think I'll give a bit of intro to. Has been on fire the last few months. Yeah, for me, online debating has actually started itching a very different itch in the sense that it's it's quite a bit more competitive than local debating, and this isn't like obviously a diss to local debating, but I think for two big reasons, online debating continues to be very difficult. A, like it's very accessible, so you have just like a lot of people into debating from many different countries coming together, which obviously just sort of like pools together the competitive talent. But B, older speakers I think tend to be more active online, so a lot of people my age now tend to be speaking online much more than they tend to be speaking in person. Obviously, the older you get, you sort of like the experience helps in getting better. So online, I think I sort of crave that right from round one, like the chance of being fourth in any room is just ever present, and I think that sort of makes the activity exciting, makes you push to get better and better. But speaking, I think we'll dive into more details on like how we've improved later. I think we have some plans for that. But to start that conversation and to talk a bit about this online experience, I believe we have someone who at in the middle got up to 4 international best speaker awards in a row, went up to now, including last week, 4 tournament wins in a row. This includes both his international and local ones. And I believe for 3 of these previously mentioned 4 to 5 tournaments, his speaker average has been 81.5 or above in all 3 cases so far. So with that slightly butchered up intro, Taha, perhaps you can jump in with the corrections and talk a bit about how it has been.
Well, Usher, you've underrated it in one way, I've been overrated in one way. I do not have 4 international best speakers in a row. I have 4 best speakers in a row, some of which were international. I think 2 of them are international, 2 are local. And however, you've underplayed it. It was an 81.8 average. I had 3 tournaments running, not an 81.5. But yes, of my previous 6 tournaments, I've been, at first, I was best speaker of the first 4, and I won the last 4, and there's a bit of an overlap in the middle, but it's not a perfect overlap. My best speaker average streak was taken by Usher, in fact, at Shahjiwana, where I stopped becoming best speaker and haven't been one since, which is very sad for me. But I am on a 4 tournament win streak, which I'm very happy about, and it's a nice spread. I've got a couple of online internationals there, and I've got a couple of local ones, big ones like Shahjiwana and the Park Debate Forum Invitational, which hopefully we'll talk a little bit about as well. So that's been excellent. But on the broader question of online debating, I want to note, Usher, there's also one other thing in your little introduction I relate to, which is taking a 4th in round 1 at a tournament, which was something I thought was in the days of young Taha and well behind me, but it was not so. Because TNT, which for anybody who doesn't know is the team name myself and Taha Iqbal use whenever we speak together, managed to take a 4th in round 1 of the Untitled Spring Open last week or the week before that. And this is like a moderately competitive online. It's not competitive enough that a World University's finalist speaking with me should be taking a 4th in round 1, but there you are. That's just a really big part of what we're talking about. Everybody's getting better. Being good doesn't mean you're safe early anymore. And even somebody as great as the Haikbal can be brought low by just some fundamentally decent speakers in round 1 if you don't take them seriously. No matter how good a speaker is, we are all fatally at risk of dropping down to a 77, 78 and just bombing in a room where you would think it wouldn't happen. But I think online has been wonderful, and it scratches a very specific itch for me as well, which is, although obviously being a senior debater and old and well known in the circuit is great now, there was something very special in the past about back when you could walk into a room and it felt like winning would be pulling off an upset. I think in the local circuit, because I've been speaking for so long at a high level now, I don't really experience this anymore. But in the online circuit, I still frequently walk into a tournament where I see the names of some participants and think, oh, if I beat them, that's going to be a really exciting story for me. And I just still get into that sort of competitive climb, walking in feeling like I have no business winning some rounds and then feeling very excited when I do. I don't think I get that as much locally anymore. So online really unlocks a whole dimension of feelings you don't get otherwise. And then obviously just add in the fact that you are hearing so many arguments from so many genuinely intelligent, brilliant people on a daily basis. You're watching when you're sitting in opening and you're watching these conniving rogues figure out how to crack their extensions in the closings. It's genuinely like exhilarating. It makes debate feel threatening from every angle in a proper competitive, exhilarating way that you just don't get very often in the local circuit. You might, at the top round of a competitive tournament like Shahjiwana, feel like you are genuinely competing with every other team in the round seriously, but it's not as often as I think most top speakers locally can attest. You have a tendency to have slightly imbalanced rooms. Online, that dynamic changes and you get to experience what it feels like the sport of debating really can be. So that's, I think, my basic take on it.
For me,
And I
it
mean,
gives
well,
me also a sense of. Oh, sorry, Mad. You go first,
no, I
please.
mean, I please do add, but I was just segueing this into talking about, what is it that, despite us knowing that there is a sense of competition, and despite us feeling like, even internationally the circuit is competitive, why are the members of this humble little podcast still doing so well? What I mean to say is, what is the process that you guys have sort of adopted to, either if it's literally just practicing, or do you feel like you've understood debating in a way that was different from previously, and that has helped you expand and develop the way you're doing it?
Yeah,
Ashok?
actually very good. I was going to dive into this पहले थोड़ा सा vaguely, then I'll get into the more specifics you asked. But yeah, it's what motivates me. I think every now and then, sort of like how Taha says, when I beat someone who I think I otherwise don't have much business beating, it gives me a sense of, okay, so like everything that they've sort of accomplished is within like grasp and reach, with the only difference being that I perhaps need to be able to pull off performances like these more consistently. So for me, it's a very okay, there is more learning to be done, but also more improvement to be done just because one can get better. Very often, one questions like, even if it's possible, can I still make the journey? Am I good enough to be as good as some of these other people? And I think these sort of moments give you that hope. But in terms of, I think, the more specific stuff, I think what has really helped, and this is a conversation that happened like in like our room a while ago, was looking back at my own speeches. Like I think I've sort of like started looking back at a couple of my speeches, and that sort of helped me realize a few mistakes I keep making. This fits into, I think, something more generally I have tried doing, which is I have tried listening more closely, and as obvious and basic as that sounds, I don't literally mean just like listening to what the other team is saying in a sense of he can just taking notes. I mean listening to it more actively, asking questions to myself while the other person is giving their speech. So if the other person has made an argument that I think there's something wrong with it, I think what I was doing sort of pehle was I was saying, okay, there's something wrong with this, there's something wrong with this. And I was like sort of leaving it at that with a sense of I'll talk about it in my speech. And I think this vagueness sort of meant I wasn't really being surgical, etc. The one thing that has helped is now when I listen into speeches, a speaker says something, I sort of have more specific engagement with what they're saying. So I'm questioning the kind of stuff they're saying as is. I'm writing slightly less, and that's something I want to improve on, Abhi, like being able to match these two skills, listening and writing. But listening more closely, I think, has sort of definitely helped me a lot at the top level, because I think very often at the top level there were moments of speeches that I was misrebutting, या फिर when they were rebutting me, मैं बस समझ नहीं आई उनकी बात, like 2-3 minutes of speech that I just had a vague idea about इसमें क्या बात हुई है, and not perhaps a more specific like idea of what exactly they've said. So I think that's been my big change. How I've done it has been practice mostly. Listen to an online match, and just like think about those speeches. But yeah, Nawaz, Taha, Maddie, you maybe if have some thoughts.
Yeah, Nawaz.
I can.
I mean, I guess with debating, something that always helps is it's a mentality thing. But the humility that Taha kind of alluded to this already, that anybody can always beat you. So I guess it's the humility of how you engage with the content and who it's coming from, and you're sincere with how you're engaging with it. That's something that's always there. Also, the humility of like engaging with judges and feedback. I think that's also something that always helps. Getting that key insight, because that helps you to understand what you need to work on. For me specifically, I would say over the last 2 years since I've been back, because I haven't really debated too much since this year. I guess I've been able to adapt more um, in round. I guess in the past, I was somebody who used to predict where stuff would go. And if stuff wasn't heading into that specific direction, or if some people were perhaps bringing up analysis or bringing up claims that are novel or something that I didn't expect, taking the debate into a completely different frame, I would have a hard time adapting to it. I guess the scope of, firstly, I think I've gotten better to like, firstly, like the variety of types of debates, like the type of frames that can arise in a debate. I've gotten better at predicting those. So there's a more diversity of thought, but I've just gotten better at being adaptable in round. And I guess something that's helped with this is that, specifically when I speak with, especially, is that, and even with other speakers, you too, Usher, I was never like this before. I've just been more open to going to and speaking other positions that I was previously uncomfortable with. Like, I'm not really a first speaker, but going first and going first up probably has helped me understand certain elements of what's going to happen in the top half. And it's also kind of weirdly helped my wing and bottom half as well, because it kind of tells you and gives you an understanding of what key elements are usually missing in those rounds, and where you want your second speaker to be focusing on it. So, and I'm probably going to be continuing that trend, because I spoke with Ahmad fast. I know it didn't work out as planned, but we can always get back and try again. Speaking with Hamza Javed, IODC, that would be interesting. Speaking with Shanavar, who knows, might even give an extension speech. But yeah, at this stage, experimenting always yields some results.
I had a follow up with you, Nawaz, because like I feel you do a lot of like content watching online, and that's one of the things that I've been doing a lot of. I've been watching a lot of just like news analysis videos, and they're not like कोई खास analysis, any random Western news, just like commentary on आजकल की खबरें. And I feel what that sort of does is, because you hear a big diversity of international news, especially in my case, I think you sort of hear a diversity of analysis on stuff. And for me, I think one of the things that helped is I've been able to just like take a lot of that analysis I hear from news, yeah, videos, yeah, like podcasts or whatever, and apply them to debate situations. I feel you're someone who engages in a lot of that. Do you think it's meaningfully helped?
It has helped, although I am not as good as you, Usher, at impacting it in a debate. So I frequently find myself getting very frustrated that maybe perhaps in round or after round that I'm thinking about, like, oh, it's just that the 15 minutes for me, to be quite honest, is not enough to fully flush out all the information that I have divulged. It's not to say that I'm not well informed. So I'll give you an example, like the final that we just give in Shahjiwana. So like closing government is giving this entire claim about Fatim people are giving this entire claim about like, okay, we want people to be more critical about existing structures and unite against like capitalism and all that, jazz. And I gave the rebuttal, like I was like, no, you're going to get individualism, so you're probably going to get more splintered and fractious groups, so you're not going to get the impetus to actually unite and take that down and all that stuff. But like, I also have examples for that. Like, so I've been reading like books, and I know about the Rainbow Coalition, and I know like examples about like Black Panthers uniting with young patriots and young lords and Hispanic and like working Southern Americans. And I was like, it would be really nice if I used that, But hey, I said, I talked about Modi disparagingly. So I guess that kind of worked. So yeah, it just doesn't always come in the time frame that's allocated in prep. Sometimes it just comes, sometimes it doesn't. It's not always consistent with me, if I'm being honest, but it definitely helps.
Makes sense. Sudha?
Yeah, I actually think being able to use information effectively in a debate is one of the hardest skills to master, because it's just built on being able to somehow force recall in critical situations, which is not as far as I'm aware, a learnable skill. It really does seem to be one of those cases of you have a certain sensitivity to how well you can use information apart from just rote memorization. I wanted to talk about a couple of other things you guys mentioned and also my own take on like what's been working out better. I did want to agree pretty significantly, Navas, on the idea of humility. I think one of the things that keeps me honest inside a debate tournament is that even when I'm running into actual school teams, I am still frightened of the possibility of losing as a serious, rational concern. I think this is often quite novel for many of my teammates, especially people who haven't spoken with me often or speaking with me the first time. They're always a bit confused when I'm still listening very carefully inside lower rooms or against what should be easy wins, and that I seem to really take seriously the possibility that there's points we're losing. It's because I think that is what humility actually means in a debate room. It's very genuinely being worried that a much weaker appearing team, which might possibly even be saying 90% stupid things, is going to beat you because there's a 10% over there that you've ignored in your hubris. And nobody wants to lose a round like that. You never want to lose a round thinking, I did something so dumb or I didn't pay attention. And that is something that is perpetually keeping me accountable, and what I think really reduces my propensity for losing to weaker teams, especially in the way that I used to lose a lot more in my university years. I think when I did genuinely have more of an ego issue and would just sort of tune out what's happening in weaker rooms. Partly, obviously, everybody got better, but partly also I've started paying attention, which has made it, I think, easier for me to take these rooms seriously. But I think for me, and I think it's funny that my growth pattern looks a bit like this, given that Usher's has a lot to do with like content and he's a content-driven speaker. Mine is going to have to do a lot to do with just thinking about debates conceptually, which I think makes sense since most of my speeches come across a bit more strategic than concept heavy. Where what I think I've been focusing on a lot recently is just figuring out where inside debating I have an opportunity to use my analytical abilities intentionally, and where I need to just largely automate it and leave it. Because I think at the very top level, one thing which really differentiates people is how much time they're spending per like silly, useless decision. Like if there's an obvious argument and you know you're going to have to hit it with like 2 or 3 rebuttals because you and every other top speaker has a certain intuitive level of understanding of this is going to be a key issue in the debate, then it just saves you so much more time and wins you so many more rounds than if you were a slightly weaker speaker who did not immediately know that this is going to be the pivot or crucial point which is going to determine the entire clash we want to base our time around. So partly to some degree, obviously, this is just a function of experience. It's a function of being in top level rooms often enough to know what sorts of things end up being important. But to a very large degree, it just comes from reflecting on every debate you do and thinking about where do debates tend to turn? Like, what are these areas inside a debate which I like to call load bearing points, which are just like the centers of analysis, which cause everything else to rotate about them. And once you figure out what those are or develop some useful, just like mental roadmaps for, okay, in a debate like this, issues around demand and supply tend to be bigger than issues around inflation, for instance, then you just start honing in on the important issues of the debate and you can dedicate your actual thinking time to that, which just lets you automate all of the silly processes away. And I think thinking about debates like this as a series of just like heuristics leading into other heuristics leading into other heuristics makes it very, very easy at the top level to differentiate yourself consistently from everybody else who is also doing very smart things. And I think this is the one that has specifically helped me improve in the top level, because every other time I've improved, like from a low tier to a mid tier debater or a mid tier to a high tier debater, it's genuinely just been by fixing certain issues. I think when you reach a higher level of debating or any competitive activity, it becomes less about fixing issues and more about realizing what you as an individual are good at optimizing. So I think over here, Usher again, for instance, and Nawaz both consume a lot of content, political content, analytical content, because they are just very foundationally strong content-based speakers as well, I think. And it just amplifies those strengths very well. For me, it comes down very significantly to just thinking about okay, but where in the debate am I going to win? And it's been reflective of how I've been thinking and improving about it as well. So I think at the top level, it really comes down to very specific, unique, individualized forms of improvement.
Well,
Usher, you are muted.
Actually, you are muted. But sort of,
Mark,
I
you're
can
saying.
sort of jump in here and when it comes to content, I suppose it is unfortunate that Asher and I had not studied much about uh, ECOWAS and African Union and the sort of
I know so much
socio-political
about
African
that.
issues,
Oh,
socio-political issues within the African continent, because that was unfortunately our downfall. Even though I think we had a fair idea of what we were talking about, the Park pre-ABP fourth round, where I think both of us were roundly convinced that we were first, myself in particular. But unfortunately, we were fourth. And of course, upon closer inspection, you realize what the faults were and where the mistakes you were making. But I do think that there's a proclivity for some of us, or perhaps for me in particular, to go through the 7 stages of grief anytime a result comes that you're not expecting. So oftentimes that happens as well. And I think what Masood is saying about humility is probably quite material to, making sure that you yourself don't get too
I really
surprised
hate to interrupt, but I
when
think
things
it's so
happen.
funny that you have added 2 more stages to the grief stages. It's just very characteristic. Please continue.
Is it not? No, but there are 7 stages of grief, aren't there? Or are this 5 stages of grief? Ah,
Two
okay.
extra for
I I end up, going through a couple of extra ones. But yeah, I mean, so that's humility.
वैसे Maddie,
But
on that humility thing, I was actually about to say, I don't know if it's the same thing that like motivates me, for example. Just one of that when Mansood was talking about humility, and I know a bunch of speakers like this, and I think for them, walking into a room thinking I could lose to anyone here is perhaps a rational thought that exists in their mind, but one that they try to suppress. That I, for example, walk into a room, and if I walk in with a sense of I could lose to anyone in this room, I feel I don't perform as well as when I'm walking into rooms with a mindset of I have it in me to come up with the performance to like just destroy everyone here. And I think this is a different thing for perhaps different speakers that perhaps everyone could talk about here. But are you guys like you think pump debaters, or are you guys you think like generally just like ice calm cool debaters? Yeah, Nawaz.
Yeah, I just don't think both mindsets are mutually exclusive. I think you can have both and retain them at both at the same time. You can be somebody who's pumped and can have the motivation and the conviction that you are capable enough to win and be the best in the room, but you can still be in possession and have the humility to know that everybody else and also perform above whatever their level even may be to you, or could have improved, or that the judge might have been convinced by their arguments, or could be leaning towards that direction. So it's just not mutually exclusive.
I prefer the alternative ke like I'm good enough to beat anyone on my best day, but how could anyone else just beat me? I'm better than them is the ideology that dominates my mindset. But no, I joke. Like I completely sort of like agree with you guys on the helping of like being able to rate your opponent respectfully helps. But yeah, sorry, Maddie, I think you were pushing this in a direction.
yeah, I mean, we've been talking quite a bit about the strengths of debating, but even now debating still has funny stuff happening. Sometimes you still hear a speaker saying something that's rather odd. Sometimes as a judge, myself included, hear speakers say something that is interesting to a degree that is concerning at the same time. So if any of you have any funny stories that you would like to share of, or just generally of interesting and funny debates that you have had over the last few tournaments, last season, something funny someone has said, something funny someone has done, or something funny that's happened.
Taha, I think you had one recently.
Yeah, so I just spoke the Untitled Spring Open with Tahik Bal last weekend. And the funny thing said here was not by a team or a judge, but by the motions committee, who decided to come up with an intricate motion, which involved basically an info slide spelling out for you Hezbollah is like dead, dead. It's like gone. Israel has finished Hezbollah. Please trust us. Please trust us. And then went on to say, you are the newly elected president of Lebanon. Would you like to go in and wipe up and clean off whatever remains of Hezbollah? Now, we all know that international tournaments have their own ways of talking about organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas. But what was comical to me over there was that this motion is just absurd. The president of Lebanon is like the president of Pakistan. It is primarily a ceremonial position. You do not get to give executive orders to go wipe up other political parties or terrorists or what have you or whatever. And then obviously, I mean, it's just comical, right? Because the info slide has gone to such pains to detail that Hezbollah is like defunct, it's done, it's cooked, and people are talking about like we're going to be able to clean it up easy. Everybody neglected that until like 5 years ago the Lebanese National Army was 2 tin cans and a dog. So it was, I think, a very funny motion which led to big warping of reality and what the Haikbal affectionately called La La Land inside his speech in that round.
um, yeah, I recently had the privilege of being at junior nationals. I strongly believe U17 debating is 80% of the reason why debate continues to remain a fun and relevant activity. And I got to judge a round called "This House Regrets the Glorification of Soldiers as Heroes." This was a fair round. It's an okay motion. Over here, one of the teams and decides to come and do some framing, and they say, "Who is a soldier?" everyone is a soldier. The single mom fighting patriarchy is a soldier. Me fighting mental health issues, I am soldier. You judge fighting your schedule today right now, soldier. And so we lived in a world where everyone was a soldier, and thus the glorification of people was the lesson of the day. This would perhaps somewhat be okay if proposition did it. This was opposition one's claim. And so this was the match I most recently enjoyed.
Nawaz, any or older even story that you can think of that you haven't gotten a chance to tell us about?
I mean, again, not partaking too much, but there was a little funny instance at the Shahjiwana me and we all of us were at recently, when the a particular GC team was a bit too loud during their internal conversation, and I might have been eavesdropping. And that was a bit of a funny little moment about them discussing whether or not they watched Rick and Morty, or whether or not which Taylor Swift songs they're most into. I think that was some key insight that influenced
Was
my
like dropping
reputations
into the
in that
gossip
job.
of Sajivna. No walls and corners safe from this man.
No, man, like, I mean, I think you got to know the competition. You got to know what makes the competition tick. You got to know the team dynamics that foundationally make the other team. And
Whether or not
yes,
somebody watches Rick and Morty is going to influence our extension so hard.
very much so. Very much so.
When you were mentioning वैसे GCU people and motions, मुझे एक बहुत fun चीज याद आई कि at the recently concluded Dino Cup का final, I believe there was a certain team in opening oppositions of GCU and GCU alumni who, for a good chunk of the motion, didn't thought that the motion was something else. Shout out to our good friends of the show, Ozjaid Hassan Rafiq, for their maneuver at the Dino Cup final.
Yeah, Bachare, that was one of the most top 10 heartbreaking moments as fellow debater, where I'm sitting there and I hear Hassan Rafiq Bhai go up to give his leader of opposition speech, and I realize Austria and Hassan Rafiq have read the motion wrong. They have mixed up one of the conditionalities in the motion, no full context, but all you need to know is both teams are functionally immortal for the purposes of the motion, and they were not treating it like that, and it cost them. And I got to see Austria's face just like sort of sink as he realized, oh no, we've done this wrong, and he had to go and try to do damage control. Unfortunately, in a final, usually too little, too late.
Any
I mean
zingers
that
your side, Mehdi?
it's that was an interesting final. I mean, not again. I've not been speaking much myself either. But given that we've just mentioned the Dino Cup, I think it would be prudent to mention that the final of the Dino Cup, as we're calling it, the Park Debate Forum Invitational, took place in a remarkably intricately designed room that was called the Parliamentary Room in the campus that we were holding. It was soundproofed. It was, you know, they had made it such that it looked like the British Prime Minister was just about to get up and give a speech, right?
Shout outs to Blackstone Law College.
Shout out to Blackstone Law College. I mean, one of the more funny things that did happen was that unfortunately there was some miscommunication, let's just call it, between the Blackstone sort of organizational committee, the org team, and the CAP and the rest of us, the Park Debate Forum chaps. Shout out to Vasa and Javed. And because of that miscommunication, unfortunately, Blackstone did not receive a very good impression of debaters in general. They were under the impression, when they heard that chief judges are going to come, they were slightly under the impression that we were going to be 60-year-olds in
I
robes
suppose
and
it is
suits and boots.
understandable, no doubt, Ahmad, for lawyers to assume something very different when they
It is,
hear Judge
yes.
Saab aa rahe hain.
It is extremely fair, for lawyers who are not, very integrated into the debate circuit, and hopefully, they'll sort of move forward in that direction. But because they were a little disappointed, their OrgCom, as the rounds went along, were increasingly disinterested in doing OrgCom things. But it was a small tournament, so of 16 teams. So fortunately, itna zyada fark nahi pada. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on the Dino Cup final? Because I'm sure lots of people had lots to say after it happened.
Yeah, before I actually wanted to use the Dino Cup as a segue into some discussion about judging. Because Dino Cup obviously not only is great because it has some of like the best speakers on the circuit come, and this time around we had a lot of returning speakers with Taha Iqbal doing a celebrity appearance, and Tabriz and Asad Zafar making a comeback amongst others.
Hassan Kassar.
Hassan Kassar, Bakhtiar, Anfia, was all making sort of like mini comebacks at the tournament. But I think one of the things that makes most events by the Park Debate Forum, I think all events by the Park Debate Forum so good, is top tier judging. Like I think at the tournament, generally, even the ones they host online, you have very qualified people sort of judging in these positions. And the reason I bring this up is because I think whilst Pakistani debating has gone far, even in terms of judging, I wanted to discuss a bit of like how we look at judging, how we allocate judges, some of our attitudes towards judging on the circuit. And I wanted to discuss this in two, like perhaps broad scenarios. One, I wanted to discuss how we evaluate judging, because I think for a while we were sort of depending on evaluating judges based on reputations, like मैं इस बंदे से judge इतना हुआ हुआ हूँ, तो I sort of have like no ये अच्छा ये बुरे हैं. And this obviously has big disadvantages. And then we sort of move to a stage where now we have CVs, so you have judge breaks, वगैरह, which are a useful metric to tell how experienced or how good someone has been rated by other debaters. The issue now becomes एक locally judge break is still not like a thing, so that means evaluating judges जिनके mostly local career गुजरे हैं कि वो अच्छे हैं या बुरे हैं, अभी तक like I think हम काफी vibes पे चलते हैं, in the sense of like we just think these are good or bad judges. And B, I think perhaps Pakistan में अभी तक we're not ready to perhaps consider debating and judging CVs as meritocratically as other circuits in the world are. So I am more like is a step we still need to take, but happy to hear y'all's thoughts on this. Taha?
Yeah, pehle to I just 100% want to echo. I think tournaments here, on average, do not take CVs anywhere near enough into account. The reason this is important is because if you had some other way to measure things, that would still be disputable, and you could say the CV probably isn't a very strong reflection of a judge. We don't. Judging here is decided entirely on an abstract mixture of pre-weighted scores and peer pressure. And it is absurd, to be quite honest, that CVs are not given any real credence over here, particularly when there are several strong judges. And I want to specifically note over here that the university circuit, in particular, judges from like the Park Debate Forum and groups like these have very strong CVs and do not seem to get to judge anywhere near enough on the local circuit, especially given the strength of these CVs. I want to note very quickly, I don't think we have the vast majority of our cream of the crop judging talent, as is locally recognized through just networks of mutual recognition, has no proof of being cream of the crop judging talent because we do not have judge breaks. We do not have ways to competitively identify judges 9 times out of 10 at our tournaments. So it is very important that we recognize the value and use of actual meritorious judge breaks, because otherwise you were running purely on vibes. But apart from that, I did want to make another note on judging, which is it's not just about obviously caps making bad decisions and stuff. That happens. Caps also make good decisions. I think there is a lot to be said for individual judges, especially senior ones, needing to hold themselves more accountable locally. Because I've been thinking for a while about just putting together a big list or writing down a list of just bad traits. I'm going to just give a very quick few, very obvious things that I see even very good judges do right now. And these are judges who I think will probably 95% of the time get the decision right because they are still in many ways committed, intelligent people, but they're still doing stupid things that they need to stop doing because this is a serious activity and it's worth that we all put time into it. I think the biggest one of these by a margin is that there are too many judges who simply do not take notes when they think a speaker is saying something irrelevant or because they think they've noted it down from a previous speech. This is absurd behavior given that you do not know at the time a speaker is saying something whether or not it is going to end up being relevant. And moreover, given that your job as a judge is not just to find the decision off of what's relevant, but also give feedback on what was irrelevant and identify what speakers can improve. I think too many top-level judges don't see this as a part of their responsibility, and they really need to start taking charge of this. I think there's also just a lack of seriousness when people are seated in panels. They talk to each other. They are visibly making comments on how speakers are performing at any given point in time. It's bad behavior, like especially when we consider that very often this is happening at school tournaments. The judges are adults whose job it is to be educational figures there for students. Behave yourselves, make sure things work better. And then just finally, in terms of like actually adhering to the rules of WSDC, I think too often judges forget what the ordinary average voter is. Too often they go in with like baggage about what they think should be running around. They're waiting for specific ideas to be said. They're too willing to believe that there are pre-existing burdens teams need to justify before anybody has said them. And then I think at the final stage, many judges are just really bad at giving feedback and OA. Like they can't seem to separate these two concepts from one another. So I'm going to just say it very cleanly to make sure everybody also understands this one. When you're giving OA, you're not meant to tell judge speakers what they could have said or should have said. That is an entirely different category. Oral adjudication is just where you tell people what happened in the debate and why a team won. Feedback is constructive commentary passed afterwards. I think if judges could actually just separate these two, we would see a pretty significant increase in quality of useful information reaching teams. But because judges keep conflating the two, teams are often confused as to the difference between what makes somebody a better speaker and what makes somebody win this round. And that's, I think, entirely on judges being irresponsible at present. So that is just a small preview of what I hope will be a document someday soon.
I also want to like just add just one more thing on some of the big trends that people are getting wrong. I think people don't take deliberation seriously either. I think panel discussions are a thing that we really need to work on in the circuit. In the sense, a lot of people when they go judging in panels, I think walk in with a bit of okay, now someone else is doing the judging for me. Like then what is the point of you coming in and us making this a panel situation in the first place, right? Like we all sort of agree that just one person's chance of getting a debate wrong is rather high in top level close matches. That's the point of panels. But I think a lot of panel discussions happen very vaguely. I think too many times I've been a part of panel discussions where rather than discuss perhaps more specific questions where judges disagree, it sort of becomes judges start giving reply speeches / third speaker extensions for the speech that they are rooting in favor of. So very often I'll hear something like, but the team that I support said these four things without any discussion on how they've been weighed up against what the opposition has said. And my point here is less that like, oh, give longer speeches and also include opposition's point, but rather more so that deliberation is sort of meant to identify as quickly as possible points of divergence between two judges and not an entire summary of how the round went, and then a discussion on why we see these two things differently and if there is some like recourse to it.
Sorry, I was going to say, I genuinely agree. I think it's because judges are just filling time very often without thinking about what the panel collab is meant to actually achieve.
And this is where two things can happen that very quickly just improve stuff. One, we need to consider the chair of the round as captain of the deliberation, and we need to not take personally when the chair says okay, stop, okay, I just want to know this, okay, I just want to know that. It is their job to cut people off and get as much information as they can in 15 minutes. This requires people to sort of like understand that this is a structured activity and not a chance for now judges to do debating. And that is the second thing. I think a lot of the times debaters sort of walk into, especially, and I think this is relevant for people who've done a lot of debating and are now judging, they walk into a situation with a bit of, chalo, ab baki sabne debating kar li, ab meri bari, convince karne ki main sahi hu. And I think like this is just like a cultural change we sort of have to accept rather quickly. You don't even have to necessarily get the decision wrong. It's just you could have seen something slightly differently on which you change your mind later. But yes, sorry if you wanted to carry this on.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying about sort of structuring, and I think that applies quite a bit, obviously, to BP judging, although we have conferral in schools judging as well now. That the person who's the chair should be in charge of leading the discussion, and when that sort of thing doesn't happen is when you end up with deliberations that are going on for half an hour and 45 minutes, even though they're supposed to be for only 15-20, after which the chair of the panel is meant to then take a vote, right, regardless of how it is that the vote ends up being, if there is a final decision that's split, but that can't happen if you don't structure the discussion properly. Nawaz, do you want to sort of comment on what you might have seen, or of other circuits as well, when you were in the UK, etc.?
I would like to caveat that I don't enjoy judging. I haven't judged much, but I have noticed a few things, and you guys have all mentioned them to a certain degree. I think the culture around how people perceive deliberations and the engagement between deliberations is very wrong within our circuit. And what I mean by that is, and I think Usher kind of alluded to this, is, and I see this specifically, at least in Islamabad, whenever I come and judge here, a lot. And I think it also happens in Lahore, definitely, wider Pakistan issue. And that is the engagement that you do have within deliberation, beyond just this fact that it's very often not structured in a good way. It's the fact that it's almost as if it's a competition and people get offended about a split and it's not being entertained in good faith. And that's something which is problematic. So I've been in numerous occasions. I've been in a room where I think, to my understanding, I have seen people who have not reneged their original decision when they have been fully convinced about the reasonings that they have lined up, right? So it's not even a case of which they're still even firmly lying on the genuine thought that they necessarily had at the beginning. It's more of a ego thing or maybe an offense thing that they want to stick to their guns and they're just unwilling to change or renege. Similarly, I think when people do stick to their guns, the way that the discourse around deliberations and splits happen, at least within this circuit, even when I'm not judging, but the way that I do hear it is that, oh, वो बेवकूफ थे, oh, जिनने तीन दिए थे उधर, oh, वो उसकी पार्टी के थे, oh, उनको जज करना नहीं आता. This is very dumb, to be very frank and honest with you, because firstly, because splits are normal. Splits can happen and they can be genuine. It's just that we have to come to a format with better leading of deliberations, but just a general and more authentic approach about those deliberations as well, that you're coming to impact the decision of a round, and not to just think that it's a debate about your personal debating philosophies necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very, very fair. So now, given that we are, at an hour, I think this is probably the best mark for us to wrap up what was sort of a returning episode.
No,
Hopefully
but
over the
like
next few weeks.
we weren't absent or anything, Iman. Like
Of course.
everyone sort of like who's been signed up to our Patreon knows that they've been getting Patreon exclusive content for the last 6 months. We've been making a video every other week. You will have noticed that quite a lot of speakers in the uni circuit have become good ekdam se this year Shahjiwana pe. They are all actually a part of the Taha Masood Patreon cycle membership, where Taha sends you a "you got this" voice note every time you give a speech. So if you want to win Shahjiwana next year, you know where to click and where to subscribe and how much to pay.
Yeah, there's a special offer on our playlist of POV. Taha Masood gives you an 85. So subscribe to that, or follow our Instagram, because we regularly post whatever tournaments we're doing and whatever other stuff we're doing. But yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining. Thanks. Hopefully we'll have more to say about things that are happening soon enough. Maybe see each other again see the wider community again once the uni season starts again after Ramzan. But yeah, until then, goodbye to everyone from On That Point.